Today we're going to do Chelik Beis and Chelik Gimel of the Kovetz. We're going to speak about Schar Mitzvah, the reward of the mitzvah. What is the reward for mitzvahs? And the connection between each schar of a specific mitzvah to the mitzvah itself. So last year we explained the definition of the Eibish's Chiyuv, give Yidden schar. That the Eibishter gives schar to Yidden isn't only a superficial thing, isn't something because the Eibishter is etzem atayv. The Eibishter is good to Merachim Achol B'Yei, so the Eibishter has mercy on everyone. So the Eibishter gives Yidden schar. The schar that the Eibishter gives to Yidden for their mitzvahs is kaviyach an obligation that the Eibishter himself put on. And that's why in Kovetz we compare the relationship of Yidden to the Eibishter as an employer to an employee, because when we do mitzvahs, so we earn kaviyach the schar that we get from mitzvahs, and that therefore the Eibishter is obligated kaviyach to give Yidden schar for those mitzvahs. So the schar that the Eibishter gets from mitzvahs is a direct outcome of the mitzvahs that Yidden do. It's not a side prat. It's not something which doesn't have to do with the mitzvah itself. It's not something which is a foreign concept of the mitzvah itself. It has a direct connection to the mitzvah itself, and it's an outcome of the Yid doing the mitzvah. Just like when a person goes to work, for example, that which the employer has to give the employee a paycheck, that which he has to pay him for his work, isn't because the employer is a nice person. He gives him a paycheck because the employee earned it through working, because like we explained the last year, that the employer has ownership over himself, and therefore he can decide to work for this balabas or not, to work for this employer or not. So since he decided to work for him, it's a deal, it's a signed deal that he's going to work for him, he's going to work for the employer, and he's going to get something in return. So that thing which he gets in return has connection to the work that he did. The more work that he does, then the more money that he makes, and the more quality work that he does, then he needs more, he earns more money, etc., etc. So the same thing with the Eibishter and Yidden. That which the Eibishter gives schar to Yidden for their mitzvahs isn't a side prat that the Eibishter is etzem atayv. It has to do with the mitzvah itself. So now that we gave this akdama, the mitzvah that the schar has to do with the mitzvah itself, we're going to start Chelik Beis of the Kovetz, which the Chelik Beis of the Kovetz speaks about what is the schar for mitzvahs, what type of schar do Yidden get for their mitzvahs, and the Chelik Gimel we're going to focus on what is the relationship, what is the connection between each mitzvah, between mitzvahs and their schar. So Chelik Beis is two sichos, one from Chelik Dalet and a sichos from Parshas Eikev Tafshin Mem Tes, where the Rebbe explains what is the definition of the schar of mitzvahs, what reward do we get for mitzvahs. So B'darach Klal and Teda we have different types of schar that the Eibishter says he's going to give us for mitzvahs, which is starting from schar gashmi. The Eibishter says that if you do what the Eibishter wants, then you're going to have rain, etc., which means that they're going to have your physical needs as an outcome of Yidden keeping mitzvahs. So you have schar gashmi, which is a physical, material reward that you didn't get from mitzvahs. Then you have Gan Eden, which is when a Yid does mitzvahs in Elam Hazeh. Then a Yid is promised to get Elam Haba. Elam Haba means that the neshama goes l'mayla, and he gets to gets to learn the Torah. He gets to understand the mitzvahs that he did down here from a different perspective, which that's a schar for the neshama. The neshama gets after he does a mitzvah. After 120 years in Elam Hazeh, he goes to Elam Haba, which is the world to come, where he gets schar for his mitzvahs. That is the second type of schar. Then you have a third type of schar, which doesn't have to do with a specific person, but it has to do with the schar of the whole world, the ultimate schar of the world's collective aveda, the Yidden of all generations' collective aveda throughout the generation, which is the Elam Haba, which goes in Chias HaMesim, which goes in Mashiach, which the way Chassidus is Machriya, according to the Ramban, that goes in Elam Haba, which is El Neshamas Begufin, the Neshamas come down to this world. That is the ultimate schar of the world and the Yidden's aveda throughout all generations. So you have the schar that you have a schar gashmi, you have Gan Eden, and then you have Chias HaMesim or Mashiach, the way Chassidus explains. Now the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, based on the Mishnah says in Kovetz, schar mitzvah, the Mishnah says that the reward for the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya Perek Lamed Tes that which is the reward of the mitzvah itself, the Alter Rebbe teaches from the reward, we're able to see what the mitzvah is. In other words, if you want to know what a mitzvah is, what is the definition of a mitzvah, you have to see what the reward of a mitzvah is. Which means that unlike when a employer is paying his employees, the money that the person gets, the money that the employee gets, doesn't, even though it comes from the person's work, even though it comes from his work that he toiled. On the other hand, the money that he gets isn't directly connected to the work that he does. From the money that you see, you can see how much work he did and what type of work he did. But just because the standard way a person gets rewarded is through money. By mitzvahs, it doesn't work like that. By the mitzvah, if you want to know what is a mitzvah, you look at the reward of the mitzvah, because the reward of the mitzvah is the outcome of what the mitzvah is. And if there's different types of rewards of mitzvahs, then you have to say there's two inyanim in mitzvah. And that's what we're going to learn which is the first sikha. And this chelik, which is sikha gimel, which is sikha from chelik dal, that brings two different mishnayos and pikavis that speak about the schar of mitzvahs. One mishnah says to have a zoid, the mitzvah kalash b'chamura, sheina teidei amat schar sham mitzvahs. Which the Mishnah is basically warning a person to be careful in all mitzvahs because we don't know the true schar, we don't know the true reward of mitzvahs, which means that mitzvahs, the schar of mitzvahs is unknown. Then you have another Mishnah. The Mishnah says, which the Rambam teaches that from the einish, from the punishment that a mitzvah has, we can figure out if a mitzvah has a severe punishment, means that it has a very big reward. So mitzvah we emphasize that mitzvahs don't have the reward of mitzvahs is all the same, but then we emphasize that there's different types of mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah which has a big einish, a mitzvah that doesn't have a big einish, which means there's different types of rewards for mitzvahs. So what's the explanation? How do these two things fit together? So the answer is that there's two different types of scharis, there's two different types of rewards because there's two different aspects in a mitzvah. There's one aspect in a mitzvah, the all mitzvahs are the same. And there's no difference between kalaka b'chamura, that all mitzvahs have the same schar, all mitzvahs have the same concept, the same aspect. And then you have another part of mitzvah, which the mitzvahs are different. And the Hataki do have some mitzvahs which are more kaviyach important, and then you have mitzvahs which are less significant. Kaviyach that Torah itself says that these mitzvahs are less, are kalis, are lighter type of mitzvahs. Now, where do these two concepts come from the mitzvah? Where do these, every mitzvah that we have comes from the mitzvah of mitzvahs, comes from the command of the mitzvahs. And if we find in mitzvahs two different types of rewards, that on one hand we madgish, on one hand we emphasize the all mitzvahs are the same, on the other hand we emphasize the all mitzvahs are different. So it must be that mitzvah, the shirish of the mitzvah, the source of the mitzvah, and mitzvah mitzvahs is also two different aspects and two different concepts of mitzvahs. Where is the shirish, where is the source of these two concepts in mitzvahs? So we know the way the Eibusha decided that he should connect to the world is an eifin of Eidus and Kelim, which means that the Eibusha created two different perspectives, two different connections that he interacts with the world. And one eifin is Eidus. Eidus shows on a revelation of the Eibusha, where the Eibusha is revealed, which Eidus main Amoy, which is connected to the Moed, which means that Eid brings out the Moed, Eid brings out the Eibusha, the way the Moed is, the way the Eibusha is. And just like the Moed is Blikvul, so the Eid is also Blikvul, which that, in other words, is the perspective of the Eibusha, the way the Eibusha connects to the world according to his perspective. That's Eidus. Then you have Kelim. Kelim means, Kelim is Gvul, Kelim is limited, or has to do with the Zulas, has to do with a separate entity which doesn't relate to a Likkutei, which is Blikvul. Which Kelim is that the Eibusha created the concept of Sfiris, 10 Sfiris, 10 different elements. Those elements are eventually going to be able to relate to Nivroim. Those elements are going to be able to nishtalsha from that Gvul and Nivroim and creations, which they also connect to the Eibusha in 10 elements. So you have the Eibusha perspective, which is 8. And then you have Kelim, which that is Gvul, which Likkutei gives in the Sinus Makim for something which is a separate entity, a foreign entity, Kaviyachal, Lagabe the Eid. And then there's a Chibur of Eidus and Kelim, that these two things connect. That's how you get Tzvidus, and eventually comes from there, Tzidus, Bria, Tzidus, etc. Now, just like since the way Likkutei transmits itself to Elamis is for Eidus and Kelim, the same thing is when you get to mitzvahs. The Eibusha gave in 613 commandments, the Eibusha gave in 613 mitzvahs, which in other words means the Eibusha wants 613 things to happen or not to happen. Now, how do you look at what is the perspective of these 613 things? Mitzad Echad, the 613, which means that they're numbered and they're different. The Eibusha wanted different types of things. The Eibusha wanted Shabbos and the Eibusha wanted Kashrus, etc., etc. And you have mitzvahs leisaseh and mitzvahs aseh. Mitzad Sheni, they all come from the Eibusha. Mitzad Sheni, they hold the Eibusha's will. So mitzad the Eibusha's perspective, mitzad the Eid's perspective, which is main amoy. So there's no difference between the mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs. All mitzvahs are the same. Kala kabachamor. There's no such thing as one mitzvah which is lower and higher. Every single mitzvah has the same emphasis of that the Eibusha's ratzon. Elamai, the Eibusha wanted different things to happen. So therefore, the 613, the Eibusha's ratzon plays itself out in 613 ways. But the main emphasis over here is the Eibusha's ratzon. Asher Gitchan V'seis V'sivan. The Eibusha commanded us to do something. That is the perspective of Eid. Sheikim Mitzvahs of Kelim. Kelim already brings out how is Zulas. Kelim already brings out a separate entity connects to the Eid. So how does Kelim look at the mitzvahs? Even though Kelim itself understand that all the mitzvahs come from the Eibusha, Kelim itself understand that all the mitzvahs are one inyan. Mitzvah Sheni, Kelim means as a tzir. Kelim means there's a certain concept which each mitzvah brings out. So mitzad all the mitzvahs are the same. Mitzad Kelim, the 613 mitzvahs, and in those 613 mitzvahs, some of them are more essential, and some of them are less essential. And that's why it plays up a Gashmias, that you have two different aspects in mitzvahs. You have one aspect in mitzvahs that you madgish, the whole mitzvahs are the same. The kalas kubachamures, the Mishnah says, don't look at the schar of mitzvahs, because all the mitzvahs, we don't know the schar of mitzvahs is all the same. Kalas kubachamures, all the mitzvahs are the same schar. On the other hand, sometimes we madgish, that machashev hefsed mitzvah connected schar, that mitzad, the inyan prati, mitzad, the detail of each mitzvah, the way the Kalim look at the mitzvah, the way the mitzvah, the shtasha from Kalim. There are 613 mitzvahs. And some of the 613 mitzvahs are essential or not essential. And if you compare it to a person's body, you have the way the nefesh expresses itself in all the ivarim, the eyes, nose, mouth, etc. Which that is the oil of the nefesh. Where the nefesh expresses itself into the kalim of the kalim of the body, which is the eyes, the physical eyes, and the physical ears, etc., etc. But then you have where the nefesh looks at these kalim, that they're all there to complete one bigger picture. And mitzad the deeper part of the nefesh, mitzad the eir nefesh, is all the kalim, all the different types of keiches that the body has, all the same. They all fulfill one inyan, which is the nefesh. In other words, nefesh neser keiches. The nefesh has all the keiches inside of it, and all the keiches are only able to come out because they have the nefesh. So the nefesh views all these kalim as not as separate things, but it views them as one inyan of the nefesh. Or if you say a person is living, the fact that a person is living doesn't mean that he has an eye, doesn't mean that he has a nose. A person living means that there's one likud which is higher than all these functions, all these kalim, and that makes all these kalim live. On the other hand, if you look at the eyes as an inyan prati, and the nose as an inyan prati, if you look at the kalim as a separate entity, how do they view themselves? How do they even view the nefesh? They view the nefesh, their relationship to the nefesh is that the nefesh is established in the eyes, and the nefesh is established in the nose, etc. And there's a separate mitzad them. There's a separate kayach that's coming specifically to the eyes and specifically to the nose. So the same thing regarding mitzvahs. You have the way the eid looks at the mitzvahs, or the way the mitzvahs have the eid inside of them. They're all the same thing. And we're talking about the whole mitzvahs are the same. It's hacheni. The way Kanim look at the mitzvahs is that all mitzvahs have a separate inyan prati, but have 613 things that the Eibishter wanted to happen, and these things are separate. So we spoke about the two concepts of mitzvahs, that there is a general aspect and then a specific, a pratistic aspect. We spoke about how that expressed itself in the shadish of mitzvah, where the mitzvah comes from. Then there's a third part, how the mitzvah expresses itself in Elam Hazim. Just like inside the shadish of the mitzvah, there's two separate things. There's the general concept, and then there's the inyan prati mitzvahs. The way mitzvahs express itself, Gashmis also, there's two separate concepts of mitzvahs. Two separate missions that mitzvahs have. The first concept of the mitzvah is that they Eibishter gave mitzvahs to Eden to be mezachich the world. They Eibishter gave mitzvahs to Eden to refine the world. Each mitzvah has their mission, their amshachah v'lakus, that's there to come down to the world. When a person keeps Shabbos, he refines a certain aspect of the world. When a person puts on tefillin, he mezachich the tefillin, mezachich his hand. Every single mitzvah that a person does is mamshach regila in the world, that it penetrates and has an effect on the gashmis of the world. And that's a big component of the purpose of mitzvahs, that they're there to be mezachich of the world, to make a dir b'tachtenim. And that's why mitzvahs have also to do with gashmis, with the physical material world. Because Torah is there to come down to the physical world and have an impact on the physical world. And each mitzvah, the way mitzvahs affect the world, some mitzvahs affect the world in a higher way, and some mitzvahs affect the world in a lower way. And also the mitzvahs which are harder for a person to do, since they're harder for a person to do, therefore the zichur that it has an effect on him, the refinement that has an effect on him is a bigger effect. So different mitzvahs are easier kalis to do, and therefore their effect, their impact, kaviyachol, is a lower type of impact. And then you have chamures, which these are not one physically harder to do, but also their significance is the biggest significance. They bring out a different aspect of the likus of the world. Therefore, the impact after the world is a different type of impact. For example, Shabbos. Shabbos is one of the most essential mitzvahs because the concept that Shabbos brings to the world is something that the impact Shabbos has on the world is one of the biggest impacts on all the other mitzvahs. So that's all mitzvah, the mission that mitzvahs have to refine the world. That's the inyan prati of the mitzvah. Now, the bigger the impact, the bigger significant an impact the mitzvah has on the world, the bigger the schar for that mitzvah is. And that's what we're talking about. Sometimes the schar of specific mitzvahs is bigger than the schar of other mitzvahs. Then you have the general concept of what a mitzvah is, not what a mitzvah does, not the impact that the mitzvah has on the world, but the etzem of the mitzvah, which is what the mitzvah is. What is a mitzvah? A mitzvah is a connection to the Eibishter. A mitzvah is l'lashon tzavtzah v'chibur. Every single mitzvah that a person does is connected to the Eibishter. No matter what mitzvah it is, it could be kalis and it could be chamuris. Why does the mitzvah connect the person to the Eibishter? So a pashas, the way we translate mitzvahs is that the mitzvah is a commandment. A tzivui. Tzivui means that, for example, the melech commands the nation to do something. So when the melech commands the nation to do something, it means the melech wants something to happen, and he tells over to the nation that the nation have to do it. When the nation do that commandment, does it mean they're dafka connected to the melech? Not dafka. If the commandment wouldn't be able to be done through an animal, etc., then maybe the ratzah would be fulfilled in a different way. The people are said for the commandment of the king to happen. The king wants something to happen, and then the people do what the king wants. In other words, by regular commandment that the king commands the nation, the main emphasis is the ratzon of the king. The main emphasis is that the king wants something to happen. It happens to be that the Am are the one who fulfill the ratzon, but the main thing is that the king wants something to happen. Then you have the connection to the Eibishter and Yidden. Mitzvahs aren't only 613 things that the Eibishter wanted to happen. It says regarding the Eibishter and mitzvahs that the mitzvahs are Ramach, Ivar, and the Malka, the mitzvahs are the limbs of the Melech, which means that the Eibishter put himself into the mitzvahs. So the mitzvahs are different aspects of Yachav Elikus, and the Eibishter connects to the person who does the mitzvah through those in Yadim. So the mitzvah isn't only a commandment to do something. The main thing, one of the main aspects of the mitzvah is that the mitzvah makes a tzavsa, the mitzvah makes a connection. But the Eibishter wanted to connect the Yidden through mitzvahs. That's why it says, the mitzvahs isn't only the Eibishter wanted things to happen, it doesn't matter who does them. The mitzvahs are a means of connection of the Eibishter to Yidden. There's some connection through Torah, there's other connections through Tefillah. Then you have a connection to mitzvahs that the Eibishter says when a Yid does a mitzvah, he is mamshech himself into that mitzvah, so Yid can connect him. And that's why it says that mitzvah is lashon tzavsa v'chibur. Not only mitzvah is a commandment, a tzivui, but mitzvah is also a tzavsa. Mitzvah is also a connection. So when he does a mitzvah, he connects to the Eibishter. Now this aspect of a mitzvah that connects to Yid to the Eibishter exists in every single mitzvah. It doesn't matter what type of mitzvah it is. It could be kala kabachamur, it could be the highest type of mitzvah, the lowest type of mitzvah. That's something that a Yid is doing what the Eibishter wants. And the Eibishter put himself into that. The Eibishter put himself into that mitzvah means that a Yid is now connecting to the Eibishter. That is where it says schar mitzvah. That the schar, the reward of the mitzvah is a mitzvah itself, because every single mitzvah that a Yid does, besides the impact that a mitzvah has on the world, besides the schar that a Yid gets for that impact, but the etzem thing that a Yid did what the Eibishter wanted, that connected him to the Eibishter. And that's equal to every single mitzvah. Every single mitzvah has this nekuda that it connects into the Eibishter. It doesn't matter if the mitzvah is a kala or shavachamur. It doesn't matter if it's one of the most stringent mitzvahs or one of the most lenient mitzvahs. Every mitzvah has that nekuda. So now, Pashas, when they get to the mission, the purpose of the world's creation, of Dirib Tachtenim, what's a negeh? It's negeh. A person does the mitzvahs. The main thing that's negeh for the world is the specific schar, the specific inyan that each mitzvah has in its own right. Because you said before that each mitzvah has a specific impact it's supposed to have on the world. So when you do that mitzvah, it impacts the world in that way. So when you get to the world, or when you get to Canaan, what's the main thing that's negeh? The main thing that's negeh, but Pashas what's negeh is the inyan prati in each mitzvah, the specific impact each mitzvah has on the world. That was Medayik from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov teaches have rizoi b'mitzvah kala. What does it mean have a zoy b'mitzvah kala b'chamura? The Baal Shem Tov teaches have a zoy is b'lashon oir, to shine. Have a zoy mitzvah kala b'chamura. Besides it meaning the pashto pshat, you should be careful on every single mitzvah kala b'chamura. Baal Shem Tov brings another type which is born in the Arivash. Which means the neshama should light up. That every day a person should make sure that he lights up with a mitzvah kala kabachamura. Now, Pashtos, if we're talking about impacting the world, if we're talking about dirib tachtenim, what's the main thing we're saying? Not the union of Eir, not the concept, the concept of mitzvahs, which the way they're connected to Eir, that all mitzvahs are equal, but the concept of Eir, a mitzvah which is Kalim, which you explained before, which Kalim means that each mitzvah has a specific mission in the world. Why does Baal Shem Tov say have a zohar mitzvah kala kabachamura? The Baal Shem Tov's madgish, the way mitzvahs come from Eir, the way the Eir's perspective of the mitzvahs, that's what brings the impact to the world. So the answer is that dirib tachtenim has two phases. Mitzad echad, we're trying to be madgish that the dida should be in tachtenim. Mitzad echad, we madgish. We emphasize that where does the Eibishter want to dwell? Dafke in tachtenim, which tachtenim means that it's limited and it has its limitations of a nivra, etc., etc. So we're saying there should be a dida b'tachtenim. There should be a connection of atzmos, of something which is completely higher than nivraim, higher than any definitions of a connection to a nivra, and that should come down into tachtenim. So that which you have to have a specific impact on the world and be madgish that every mitzvah has a specific impact on the world. That's there to fulfill the concept of tachtenim, that the limitations of the world or the definition of the world as a nivra, as a tachtin, that should connect to Likkutei. And like you said before, that each mitzvah has their specific impact. In other words, that the mitzvah has the way it's mislabish in the world to impact the world according to the definitions of the world. But at the end of the day, what's the mission? The mission is not only that it should be that the tachtenim should be connected to Likkutei on their level, but there should be a dida b'tachtenim. The atzma should be connected to the world. That the atzma should connect to the world on his terms, on the Eir's terms. Which the Eir's terms is the Eibishter's perspective, which is completely higher than Nineveh. So that's what the Baal Shem Tov says, that the main thing, the way we make a dida b'tachtenim is to have a zoyer k'mitzvah kal, that a person shines up the world with the Eir's perspective. Because what brings the real dida b'tachtenim is when you do a mitzvah, not because it has an impact on the world, but because it's the Eibishter's tzivui, schar mitzvah. When the person does that, that brings the etzem of the Eibishter down to the world. So you have to have both. You have to have a taka inyan, a kavanah pratis. You have to have an intention that the mitzvah is going to have a specific impact, and each mitzvah has their different impact. That's why you have kala k'vachamura. You have different types of mitzvahs. You have mitzvahs which are stringent and mitzvahs which are lenient. But at the end of the day, what's mamshich? Once you do that, once a person is refining the world in the world's terms, the kavanah is that the world should be completely elevated to a area which is higher than the world's terms. That you do with the Vizoy, you reach a level that all mitzvahs are equal. Because that's a mitzvah, that's the essence of the mitzvah, that he is connecting to the Eibishter. And Aveda, what does that mean? That even when a person is doing the Aveda and being mamshach Likkutei involved, what's mudgish in his Aveda, what's the core of his Aveda of Kabbalah Sale, and that he's doing something specific because that's what the Eibishter asked him to do, is mudgish in every single action that he does. Because that's what brings down the essence of the mitzvah, which connects to the essence of the Eibishter, and brings down the essence of the Eibishter, the essence of the Eibishter into the world, that not only dida b'tachtenim should be that the world is elevated in according to his terms, but dida b'tachtenim means that the world is elevated according to Atmos' terms, and therefore Atmos is nimshach into tachtenim. And you have a real dida b'tachtenim, which means a dida that's muslim. Now the next sikha gives a little bit more explanation of why schar mitzvah. Why now we explain that there's two pratim in the mitzvah. You have the essence of the mitzvah, and then you have the pratim of the mitzvah, and the emes schar for mitzvah is schar mitzvah. The next sikh, which is sikh from Pashas Ekev, Top Shin Mem Tes, the Rebbe explains more b'emek why is schar mitzvah. Why do we say that the true schar of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself? So we explained before that mitzvahs have three levels of schar. You have schar gashmi, then you have schar ruchni, which is a Gan Eden, and then you have chiyas hamesim, which is the schar of the whole world together. Now, what's wrong with that? Why aren't those things legitimate schar for mitzvahs? Why does it emphasize schar mitzvah? There's other schar that you get for mitzvahs. The Torah clearly says you have an imuch geset leichel, and that when it's gishmechem beitam, you have schar gashmi for mitzvahs, and then you have Gan Eden, etc. So why does the Mishnah say schar mitzvah if there's other very high rewards that the Eibishter gives for mitzvahs that we do not hear? So the answer is that the definition of schar means that it has some sort of erech to the work that a person does. Like you explained in the first shir, the difference between an eved and a poel, a worker and a slave, a servant, that a servant doesn't get any money. Why? Even though he works very hard, because he never chose to do it. He's doing it because he's forced to do it. Since he's doing it because he's forced to do it, he doesn't get any money. Mashenkin, a worker, employee, the reason why he's getting money is because there's a silent dealership between the employee and the employer. But the employer could have worked for someone else. The fact that he's working for this specific employer, which means he chose to work this work, that's why he gets money for it, because he chose to do it. Something he owns that work. He owns that work that he does. And therefore, since he owns the work that he does, he's trading off, he's making a deal with the employer, that he's going to do the work for the employee, he's going to offer his talents, whatever he has to do for the employer, but the employer in return is going to give him something back, which is lifiarach, which has some sort of common denomination between the work that he does. And therefore, a person gets paid lifiarach the amount of work that he does. Now the schar that we get from mitzvahs has to be lifiarach what a mitzvah does. It has to have some sort of value connection to what the mitzvah is. Because if not, it's not reward. If it's too much, then it's a present. And if it's not too much, then he's not getting paid back for his Aveda. It's like heaven. So the schar that you get, like a definition of reward or salary or payment, means that it has to be valued at the Aveda that a person does. Now the question is, how is any reward valued at what a mitzvah is? What is the value of a mitzvah? So like we explained in the last sikha, the value of a mitzvah is unlimited. The value of a mitzvah is connected to the Eibush, connected to Atzis and Mahus. That doesn't have any value. Because anything that a nivda has, or anything that even the highest giluyim that we have the Maila cannot be a schar for mitzvah, because if a mitzvah means that a person connects to the Eibush, it's connecting to the Etzem of the Eibush, then anything, Sai Gashmi, Sai Ruchni. Gashmi is for sure has no connection to, has no value to a mitzvah. And even Ruchni is anything, any gil of the Eibush cannot be a true schar for mitzvahs, because everything that comes from the Eibush will be giluyim. Anything which is nisgale to Nivra, anything which is revealed to Nivra means that it has to be revealed to him, and therefore it's something which isn't the essence of the Eibush. Let's talk about we say Yafa Shav Achas B'Shuva Meisin David Mel Maza Mikol Chaya Elam Haba, because Elam Haba is only a Elam Haba is only a Gilui revelation of the Eibush. Shaking we do a mitzvah down here, you connect to the essence of the Etzem of the Eibush. So how can there be a schar for mitzvahs? The Rebbe Marash in the Hemshech V'Kochav Tafish Lamed Zayin has a lot of arichas about this, and he explains that the true schar of mitzvahs, the only true reward the Yid got for mitzvahs is that the Eibush gives a Yid the nachas ruach that he got through doing the mitzvah. Every time we do a mitzvah, the Eibush gets nachas ruach from that mitzvah. In other words, the value of the mitzvah is the nachas that the Eibush gets from it. And that's why the Eibush gave the mitzvahs is nachas ruach and fanash shamayt and nazar etzem. The Eibush gave us mitzvahs that he should get nachas ruach. So last lover, the gilim last lover, what are they? They're the nachas ruach that the Eibush gets on the mitzvahs. He shares that with the Yidden. And that's schar mitzvah. But the schar of the mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. How is it the mitzvah itself? Because the nachasuach and the Eibush gets on the mitzvah, he shares that with Yid, and that's what's going to happen with Lasalav. Lasalav are going to share in the Eibush's pleasure that the Eibush got with the Eibush got from mitzvahs. But the Rebbe says, interesting over here, the Rebbe frags out the whole idea, and the Rebbe says that anything that the Eibush gives to Yid is a gilu. By definition, anything that the Eibush revealed to Yid is a gilu, is revelation. So even if the Eibush is going to reveal to Yid the pleasure that he has for mitzvahs, at the end of the day, it's only a gilu. That's not the etzem nachasuach that the Eibush has. Because if the Eibush is giving it to Yidim, which are Kaviyach Azulas, which are a separate entity, and that's why we don't feel it without him giving it to us, then it must be there's a Gilui. It's a Gilui. And if it's a Gilui, it cannot be the Etzem meaning, because anything which is in this Gala means it's not the Etzem meaning. And that's like what we say, even if the schar is the Eibush's Nachasruch. Because at the end of the day, the Eibush's Nachasruch, we're going to feel the Nachasruch. So even though it's not Nachas Ruach according to our terms, it's according to the Eibush's terms, but it's the way the Eibush is revealing the Nachas Ruach to Yidden. And if it's the way the Eibush is revealing something, it's a gil, it's not that's a meaning. So the Mela, how can that be schar, legitimate schar for mitzvahs? And for sure, when it comes to the Gashmitik schar that the Eibush gives to you for mitzvahs, but it's not the Geshmeich and Mitzvah that the Eibush says he's going to give Gashmis as a reward, as a return for mitzvahs. How can Gashmis be any value? A reward for a mitzvah. So the explanation of this is that the true value of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. There is no reward that you can get for mitzvah. There is no reward, the legitimate reward that you can get, because any reward has to be valued according to the work that happens. And since a mitzvah is invaluable, there's no value for a mitzvah, because every single mitzvah that he does, he connects with the Eibush, which the Eibush is not mugdar. So that connection is a mugdar. That connection has no definitions and no value whatsoever. It's completely unlimited. So the schar of a mitzvah is a mitzvah itself. That's what the Mishnah says. The schar of a mitzvah itself, because all the levels, all side the schar gashmi, side the schar ruchni, side the schar that we get by gashmi, side the schar gan eden, and even in Haba, that's not a true reward for mitzvah. We'll see soon why we need such a reward to begin with. But that's not the true reward of a mitzvah. It's only a step of the reward. But that's not the emes, that's not the true definition of the reward, because it doesn't have a true value compared to a mitzvah. What is true valuable compared to a mitzvah? The mitzvah itself, the connection itself. Not only is the connection itself the schar for the mitzvah, but the Eibush made that each mitzvah leads on to another mitzvah. Mitzvah gereres mitzvah. Naturally, one of the natural components that a mitzvah does is that it leads on to another mitzvah. Which means that the schar mitzvah that Rebbe teaches is that from one mitzvah you're going to come on to do another mitzvah. So schar doesn't mean you're going to get something extra. You're going to get something which doesn't have to do with the mitzvah itself. The mitzvah itself, that is the schar for the mitzvah itself. That which Teda says, yes, schar gashmi. So the reason why the Eibush says that you can have schar gashmi a material schar for mitzvah isn't because that is a reward. That type of schar isn't a reward for the mitzvah, but that's only in order that you should be able to fulfill the mitzvahs properly. So that's vital connection to the mitzvah itself. The true reward for mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. And that which you have schar gashmi, that which you can have material schar for mitzvahs isn't because that is a value for the mitzvah. It's only there that it can enhance a person's life, that he can be able to do another mitzvah, geredas mitzvah, etc. So the true value for a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself, because anything else is giluim. When a person does the mitzvah itself, he connects to Atzmos. What does it mean he connects to Atzmos? He connects to the Eibishter himself, because the Eibishter himself put himself into mitzvahs. That is chelik beis of the Kovetz. The next year we're going to focus on the connection of the schar to mitzvahs. After we explain that there's two different types of schar mitzvahs, there's the schar mitzvah. And then you have the schar of Gan Eden and the schar gashmi that you get from mitzvahs. What is the connection of that schar to mitzvahs, and why do you have to have another schar? Why isn't schar mitzvah enough? Why do you have to have another schar besides the schar mitzvah?